stepping through the 66 books of the Bible. We are on the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is the second to the last book in the history books in the Old Testament, but it's the last chronologically. So, we'll go next week. We're going to go through Esther, and she's the last history book out of the 17 that we have. In fact, let me just go to this. Remember this, I've shown you this before. We've got 17 history books broken up with the 5 poetic or wisdom books, and then you've got 17 prophetic books, 5 major and 12 minors. All of these kind of go into the same time period, except for up in the history books, the last 3 that we've gone over, which was Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, are all post-exile. And then down here in the prophetic on the 17, the last 3 prophetic books, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, are post-exile. And then we're going to back up after we do these 3 after next week. We're going to take a pause and do 5 wisdom books. And then we're going to start with these. And these are going to fill a lot of the gaps of those time periods. Remember, what I kind of showed you is we're marching through this time period of man. The 2,000 years from creation to Abraham, 2,000 from Abraham to the cross, and then 2,000 from the cross to 2033. We've been focusing on the middle 2,000. I thought I was going to be ambitious, but I didn't do it. I want to draw a new chart sometime because we're going to be getting into this, especially when we go into the New Testament. And I want to show the 2,000 years, the third 2,000 year period, because Nehemiah is going to take us all the way to what people call the 400 years of silence, So you have Nehemiah and Malachi, which are going to minister together at the end of the book of Nehemiah. And then we're going to go silent as far as God sending a prophet, a king, a judge. God is not going to have a spokesman for 400 years. But in that 400 years, a lot happens, right? Where are we right now in kingdoms? We have the Persian kingdom. We have Artaxerxes, is what we're going to be getting into. We left that with Ezra, Artaxerxes. And once that's over, in this 400 years of supposed silence, it's really not quiet. We're going to have Alexander the Great. He's going to conquer Persia. He's going to die. His 4 generals are going to take over. I'm probably going to pronounce this one wrong. Sudia. He's one of the 4 generals. And that's where Antioch Epiphanes comes from, who desecrates the temple. And then that causes the Jews to have to rededicate the temple. That's where you get into 1st and 2nd Maccabees, those books that we talked about the very first week where they're the apocryphal books or they're history books. We get a lot of fill-in of those 400 years of silence. And then Rome conquers Greece. So a lot of things happen in those 400 years. So it's not accurate to call it 400 years of silence. It's 400 years where God's not speaking specifically with a prophet, a king, a judge, or one of his, avenues that he normally speaks to. Holy Spirit's still active. Holy Spirit's still doing things. And there's history of the Jews in that 400 years. So anyway, but we've been focusing on this, and it's because we're coming to an end, we are coming to an end with Nehemiah. I want to show you, we're at 445 to 432. So 32 years before we get to that 400 year period. And that's when in 26 AD, John the Baptist comes on the scene. So we're marching down the Old Testament almost to the end. And I like this chart. I put it there because it shows Nehemiah that we're under, but Malachi is over there too. Malachi and Nehemiah at the last part of Nehemiah is going to minister together. So we're going to see that. Let's see. I wanted to do this. We're in the third, the restoration. That's where we are. Remember, we've already covered Ezra, where Cyrus gave him permission through Zerubbabel to come rebuild the temple. Ezra, 58 years later, comes and reissues the covenant under the law, the Mosaic covenant. They got way away from the Mosaic covenant. The Mosaic covenant is a conditional covenant. So they reestablished the conditional under Ezra. Now we'll move into the third phase under Nehemiah, which is 13 years later. after Ezra got there. So, but remember, we skipped this whole under Azursky, the Kingdom era of Persia, Esther. We're going to next week cover this section right here where Esther, Queen Esther, if she didn't do what she did, none of this other stuff would happen, right? Because Haman would have killed everybody. That was the goal. So we're going to get there. So we're on under Artaxerxes. We skip over Esther right now, and we're going to finish up on Nehemiah. Last week under Ezra, we said restoration was the theme of the whole book. And this continues under Nehemiah, but now it's restoration of the wall. So it's remember, Babylon took Israel off in exile in 3 waves, and God's bringing them back in 3 waves. And this is the 3rd wave, and the focus is on the wall, because the wall had not been touched, even though the temple, and they were back under it. The book of Nehemiah is named after its author, Nehemiah. Much of Nehemiah is written in first person, so while he doesn't say, thus saith Nehemiah or whatever, but it's first person, so we know it was Nehemiah, and tradition has it was Nehemiah. It means Yahweh comforts. His name means Yahweh comforts. There's 13 books, so it's a pretty small book too. Ezra was 10, but even though Ezra is only 10 and Nehemiah is 13, it's still packed full of information. It's, I don't know how we do books of 50 chapters like Genesis stuff. But because these ones with 10 and 13 seem to take so much information as well. Unlike Ezra, which was written in Hebrew, when it dealt with the Persian edicts, it was written in Aramaic. This is all Hebrew. The time period is 445 BC to 433. And then I have question marks at the end because Nehemiah comes 13 years after Ezra, and he stays for 12 years. And it's going to be interesting because he's going to ask the king of Persia for permission to go. And there's these questions of, well, how long are you going to be? And he doesn't really say. He says, so I give the king a time period. 12 years later, he comes and he's here. Now, the wall gets built in 52 days. So he comes here to rebuild the wall. He does that in 52 days. But he stays there in Jerusalem ministering for 12 years. Then he goes back to Persia. We're not told how long he stays in Persia, 1, 2, 5 years. We don't know. But then he gets permission to come back. And when he comes back, he completes the book, chapters 11, 12, and 13, I think, or maybe 12 and 13. He completes the book of Nehemiah in his second trip back. And we're not told how long he stays back there either. So I put question marks because he returns back after 12 years. He comes back. We don't know how many years later, and we don't know whether he stays in Jerusalem and dies there, or whether he eventually goes back again to Persia. We don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us. So that's somewhat unknown. Just to get you a frame of mind on these books we're reading, it's 90 years after Zerubbabel, because remember there's that 58-year gap between Zerubbabel and Ezra, and then it's 13 years after Ezra first comes into the scene, reestablishing the law. So Nehemiah this 3-phase system isn't 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, or 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. There's big gaps of time that we've seen in the book of Ezra. What did I want to say? Okay. You've seen this too, but I had to just bring it up again because we're talking about the overview of what got us here. But we talked about the 3-phase of exile that Nebuchadnezzar did. And in 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar took the first group of people to Babylon, right? And we know that Daniel was there. We're going to study more about that when we go to the book of Daniel. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are there as well. That's phase 1. Zerubbabel that we went over, the very first group that comes back, was 538, 70 years later. And that's important because Jeremiah prophesied, you're going to go into exile for 70 years. And I love this because in God's greatness, he has the people in exile gone for 70 years, and then the temple on the 3rd phase of Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar, destroys it in 586. And then 70 years later, we have it rebuilt by Zerubbabel in 516, 70 years later. So not only the people groups are taken away and brought back in 70 years, but the temple destruction and the temple restoration is 70 years apart. A double fulfillment of Jeremiah's prophecy that it will be God's, and we're going to learn in Jeremiah why it happened. They were punished for 70 years because they were not celebrating the Sabbaths, right? The land Sabbaths. Every 7 years, give them the land rest. They didn't do that.
So the temple was rebuilt before Nehemiah came back and
Whoa. Yeah. And remember, there's the three phases is first Zerubbabel built the altar and they started making sacrifices to God. Then Zerubbabel built the temple foundation, and then 13 years later, Ezra brings the law and says, okay, guys, we've been living sacrifice. We need to reestablish our covenant with God. Remember those covenants? The Mosaic covenant? They broke it. So the Mosaic covenant was broke because it was a conditional covenant. They reestablished that. We're going to have to do that again in Nehemiah. Unfortunately, they're going to have to reestablish that covenant. With God, unconditional covenants are never broke, right? So they're always considered. That's why it's important to go through those 8 different covenants. All the Adamic covenant, the Mosaic covenant, the Davidical covenant. All those are really important because as you're going through, you say, well, which covenant are they under? Which covenant are they breaking? And then which covenants is God given them completely unconditional? And it's important because the Abrahamic covenant gives them this land, the temple mound. He gives it to them forever because it's unconditional. But the Mosaic covenant comes along and says, it's your land, but the condition is you have to follow my commandments. If you don't, I'm going to send you into exile out of the land. So it's yours, but your condition to occupy it is based on your faithfulness to God. So they get kicked out of the land. And it's not the first time, right? And so every time we see them conquered, they're being judged by God. God's hand of protection was removed from them, allowing the world to seize them and judge them. It's a lot like the Christian life too. If we're following the will of God, it's kind of like, and this, I haven't thought this analogy out, but it's like you have an umbrella and it's pouring down raining everywhere out in the world. And God, if you're in God's will, you're walking on the umbrella. But when we walk our own way, the umbrella's still moving where God's will is, and you're out there under a storm with lightning and thunder. The world can chew you up and spit you out because you're not where God wants you to be. So our goal is to seek back, where do you want me, God, to get back under that protective umbrella that God has for us. Doesn't mean you're not going to have tribulations. The Bible clearly tells us, in this world, you're going to have tribulations because there's more things than just being in the will of God. If you're in the will of God, you could not be judged now or spanked by God, but you could be attacked by Satan because Satan doesn't want you to be in the will of God. So all of a sudden, instead of God spanking you for not being in his will, you can have Satan attacking you because you're in his will. But I'd rather be in God's will and being attacked by Satan than out of God's will and being disciplined by my dad. So that gets us to here. I wanted to show you. So I wanted to start down here at the bottom. Nehemiah arrives in the 20th year of Artaxerxes. The Bible, or the book of Nehemiah, doesn't tell us the year that he comes. It always references the reign. Yeah. Who's reigning and what year of that reign? In the 20th year of Artaxerxes. So historically, we know history, and the world knows this too. Artaxerxes reigned from this to this. We count 20 years. Boom. That's when Nehemiah came. So that's how we find these years of 445. The Bible doesn't say in 445 BC, like, because when Nehemiah was written, there wasn't a 445 BC, right? But they knew who was in reign and what year the reign was when he went in. So he was in reign in the 20th year of Artaxerxes. And once again, he reigns for 20 years because he tells us when he goes back, it's in the 30, whatever that would be, 13 years later, he goes back to Persia. So we know the length of his reign, or 12 years later, 12 years. And it also says in Nehemiah chapter 6, we're not there yet, but this is kind of a flyover before we go back to chapter 1 and work our way there. Chapter 6 tells us in verse 15, they finished the wall. That's like the last thing in that verse. Then the wall was completed. So right now, Jerusalem is in disarray, right? They have the temple, but if you don't have in those days especially, if you didn't have a wall, not only were you exposed to other armies, which you could have been if it was worth breaking into Jerusalem. Jerusalem really had nothing to break into at this time necessarily, because all the gold and all the wealth had been pillaged by Babylon and taken away. But it was exposed to bandits too. There's no wall around the city, so bandits could come in. Why build up anything in Jerusalem if bandits next month could come and take it away from you? So the wall was that critical. We don't think of things like that because the world doesn't work that way right now. We have a little more structure, law, and our law is supposed to protect you anyway. So Nehemiah is going back to rebuild the wall.
So it's a relatively peaceful time, though, during. I mean, I'm just thinking if they don't have the wall, they're probably not being, like, God's protecting them from not being attacked. So much.
If you ever play King in the Hill, no one attacks someone at the bottom of the hill. You go to the top to defeat, and Israel's at the bottom of the hill, right? They're in captivity, and no one's worried about Israel because, well, Israel doesn't even exist. Even Judah doesn't really exist right now. Right? So it's not that there's peace there in the region. It's that Israel doesn't play in anything because they're not a threat. They're not a threat to anybody, and they got nothing to steal. So,
like Canada.
Yeah, kind of Canada. Don't worry about.
But the thing that fascinates me in the Bible is the time period and how the word keeps working for, to me, 70 years. I'm not going to remember.
Right.
You know, and it's just like the work of God, you know, from Genesis all the way through Christ, and you're just going, oh my gosh, how did he get the Bible that succinct?
Yeah.
You know, 4,000 years.
Only God could have done it, right? That's why when people think man wrote this and stuff over the how many different
It's a fairy tale.
Yeah, it's a fairy tale. It all fits together so perfect. Only a orchestrator could have done it. You know,
Besides that, people aren't capable of doing something 4,000
right apart. Yeah,
apart.
Yeah.
You just can't.
no, you can't. So, yeah, the Bible itself proves itself. If you're honest and you search it, it's very easy to see how the Bible, speaks of its truth. So we're going to break this kind of up into 4, 3: the rebuilding, the revival, and the reform up at the top there. That's probably Nehemiah is going to focus on the rebuilding, but then he's going to have to address, once again, just as we said Ezra did, he had to revive and renew the covenant because they broke the covenant. They're going to break it again. They're going to have to revive it again. And then the reform is going to be the addressing of the covenant being established with them again. And that's how the book ends. Them reestablishing their covenant with God, and then boom, that gets us that 400 years of history where God's not going to speak to them until John the Baptist comes on the scene. So let's take a look at this. Who is Nehemiah? He's a wall builder, obviously, but he was a cupbearer. And to say a little bit about the cupbearer, it's a very prestigious position. The Persian Empire had certain restrictions. You had to be tall, handsome, well-spoken, because you're going to be in the presence of the king constantly. They're just not going to throw any servant in front of the king. In fact, the reason Nehemiah, as we get into chapter 1, is scared is if you insult the king, even by going there being sad, you're sad in the king's presence. It was against the law to be sad in the presence of the king because you're insulting that the king's reign might be not all it should be. And so Nehemiah goes to the king when we see it sad. And then so we're going to take a look at that. But so it's not just any position. It's a very, very high position. Of course, you've heard the thing, long live the king. Mm-hmm. Well, that may not be long live the cupbearer, because the cupbearer tasted all the king's wine and food. And if someone tried to kill the king, the cupbearer, the king may live long, but the cupbearer is not going to live long, right? Because you're going to have to get a new cupbearer because you foiled the assassination of the king. And a lot of kings got poisoned back then.
Oh, yeah. Another thing that's fascinating about that is to have a Jewish cupbearer.
Yeah.
how in the world would that, why wouldn't he have a bird,
Well,
that's amazing.
it's different than because before this, Esther is a queen and she's Jewish. So, and even Babylon, what Babylon did and Persia took them over is they took the best of the best. When Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were youth that were the best of the best of Jews. They took them into exile and then they trained them in Babylon. They trained them to be the best servants. They gave them the best food. So these people were chosen because they were the best and then groomed to be better and then put in services. Yeah. So they were servants. So, they were
There
Your
are some
fruit.
riskier positions than others.
And there was,
Yeah.
and it's true in life today. I don't want to get off the back track, but I remember I used to work for Microsoft, and I I have presented to Bill Gates like 3 or 4 times, and my team always, oh, you're so lucky you get to present to Bill. I'm thinking, not on your life. There's nothing I can say that's going to impress him. There's only things I could say that's going to get me in trouble. Yeah. It's not an advantage to be up, and it's not an advantage necessarily to be presenting to the king and up in the king, because you can get yourself in more trouble. If you do good, you did your job. That's it. You did your job. If you do bad, you're visible. So this is what Nehemiah's position is. He's presenting to the king of Persia, but he can also.
Were you always happy when you saw Bill Gates?
No.
That's a whole other story.
Another time.
Another time. As we said, he was there for 13 years, and he was there to rebuild the temple. Rebuild the wall. Okay. Chapter 1. We're going to go through these, and because I can't read the whole chapters because it would be, so we're going to just kind of hit some high spots in there. In chapter 1, we have a new character that's introduced, Hananiah. Hananiah is Nehemiah's brother. Now remember, Nehemiah has never been to Jerusalem. He was born in captivity. He was serving Persia, and he had never even been there. But his brother, we're not told why, made a trip to Jerusalem. He came back and he gave a report to Nehemiah, and it threw Nehemiah in distress because he said, it's a horrible, there's no walls, there's no gates, there's a bunch of rubble. It just gave this really dark picture to Nehemiah about the condition of Jerusalem. And it put a burden on Nehemiah's heart. It's interesting. In the Bible, there's a couple places that God says, I'm going to put it on the heart of my people, the Jewish people, and bring them back to Zion, to Jerusalem. And this is one of those. That under Nehemiah, right? This 3-phase migration back to Jerusalem, God put it on the hearts of the Jewish people to come back to their land, to their promised land. I think it's going on now. 1948, it happened, right? In 1948, in our lifetimes, we have most of our lifetimes. I think all of us, probably most of our lifetimes.
You were born in 48?
Yes, I was.
Anyway, I guess 67 is the second phase of that. God brings them back in phases. He brought them back in 1948, and then he brings them back in 1967, where they regained Jerusalem, the 6-Day War and stuff, and he's bringing them back now. This is a pulse of the end times that is occurring right in front of our eyes. We're studying Nehemiah's time where he came back in the 3rd phase. We are in phase 2, 48 to 67 of the return now. The Bible doesn't say anything about it being a 3-phase, so I'm not saying the final phases here, but it does give us an indication of where the times we're living in right now. There's a phase back. And then he will even do it again in the 70th week of Daniel. There's a return again, even from the 4 corners of the earth. He's going to bring them all back. So anyway, it is a theme of God where he brings his people that had been expelled throughout the world back home, and we're just studying one of these times. So, in here, there's a long prayer from verse 5 to 11 is just a long prayer of Nehemiah. And I see this because in 4, let's just start with 4, and it says, when I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. And then it goes into 8. I skipped 5, 6, and 7 for space. Remember the instructions you gave your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. That's that condition I told you about. And remember, Moses, Nehemiah in his prayer is quoting Deuteronomy chapter 31. This is one 800 years ago. Noah said to them, look, Deuteronomy, remember, we had Exodus and the wilderness wandering. They were going to go into the promised land, but those people, because of their lack of faith, were forced to wander, and they wandered until that generation died off. And then the next generation is going to go into the promised land. And this is when Deuteronomy, Moses, before he dies, is giving them the law a second time. Deuteronomy means second law. It's giving them the law the second time. And in that law of Deuteronomy is when he says, yes, God's giving you this land. He goes, but not only if, but when you break his commandment, he is going to expel you from the land. And that's 800 years before it happens. Moses knew through God that the people that he was encouraging to go into the promised land were not going to stay there forever. They were going to get expelled. And now Nehemiah is quoting Moses saying that, okay? But I love it because in God's love and grace, with the word but if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if you're exiled, people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. He's doing it for his name's sake. And lots of times you see the Jewish people praying, don't do this for me or our people. We don't deserve it, but do it for your name's sake to show the world and our enemies that you are true, loving, and kind. And so that God does do that lots of times because of that. So there's this, I encourage you that, there's more to this in verses 1 through 11. And then he goes into 6 and he confesses the sins of himself and the nation. So I just encourage you to read that whole thing. That's good. But what was I going to do there too?
Was that like a private prayer, or is that like something he did?
I think it was out in the open.
Okay.
It doesn't say that, but I think when his
Here he's private. In the picture, he's very private.
It's half like
That was there.
it was right after his brother gave him the news. So I don't know who was in the court, who was there when his brother came, but I don't know because he doesn't tell us. But
That sounds very familiar for the Jeremiah one where it says
if my people call by my name, it's what? They're both basing it on the covenant that they're under. And the covenant says that, if you don't follow my commandments, you're going to be exiled or punished. If you do, if you return and haul back, I will return you. So all the prophets knew the word of God. So when they're making a prayer, they're praying, claiming the word of God. And we should do the same thing. In our prayer, we should work in the promises of God in the word. So our prayer should encompass the word of God as well. And that's what they're doing, which is why some of the prayers do sound familiar. Okay, so in Nehemiah, chapter 1, verse 1 starts out like this. The word of Nehemiah, son of Hekeliah, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa. Okay, that's a lot of stuff. That's one verse. And what do we learn here? So Nehemiah, why does he use his father's name, Hekeliah? If that's how you pronounce it. Well, because Nehemiah's a common name. It's interesting. If I say James in the New Testament, where do you go? There's James, son of Alphaeus. There's James, son of Zebedee. There's James, half-brother of Jesus. I mean, there's multiple James. 2 James are apostles. So I can't just say James because you won't know which James I'm talking about in the Bible. You might go right to the son of half-brother of Jesus because he wrote a book and the others didn't, but they're in the Bible, right? So you got to know, and Nehemiah is a common Jewish name as well. So he, in all of them, we talked about that in Kings, when the kings, they said which father, because we need to know which king they're talking about. And so he gets that. In the month of Kislev, remember, so the Jews use a lunar solar calendar, and they have 12 months of 30 days each for 360 days in a year. So whenever you're reading the Bible and you're calculating, I don't do this because I'm not that much into that. I know enough to be dangerous. But whenever you're calculating prophetic dates, you need to use a 360-day year, not a 365 like us. And because they used a 360-day, if you had a pure lunar calendar, this is extra credit information, you lose like 11 days a year. So you would be off completely on your spring, summer, winter, and fall years. So they had to reset that to stay in sync with the sun or orbit around the sun for seasons. So what they did is like 6 times in a 20-year period, maybe 19-year period, they stuck in a third or a 13th month. So Adar is the 12th month, and every 6 times in a 19-year period, they would stick a 30-day month in there. So that year, they would have 13.
Like our February.
It's kind of like leap year, but it's even more severe, right? Because it's 30 days to resync them and stuff like that. Of course, we got away from that. Julius Caesar gave us the Julian calendar. The Julian calendar is 365.25 days, but that's not good either. Pope Gregory in 300 something like AD, he gave us the Gregorian calendar, and that's what we're on today. And it's 365.24 or something like that. Not 25 because it's two. Anyway, it doesn't matter. 2422 or something like that. Some other, and that's what we use today. But they did not use that. So when we're looking at that in the month of Kislev, that's the 9th month of the Jewish calendar. In the 20th year. So this gives us exactly to the month that Nehemiah is going in front of the king. And it also tells us where, Susa. So you remember Babylon conquered Judah, Persia conquered Babylon. And when they did, they moved they had 3 palaces. And if you're reading through the Bible and talking about the Persian king, whether it's important or not, they will give you the information on where they're from, where they're doing it from. Like the handwriting on the wall that we talked about, that wasn't in Susa. That was in, I can't remember. So they had 3 palaces. Susa was their winter palace, kind of like,
Going to Florida.
yeah, exactly, like going to Florida. So this was their winter palace, and this is where they are. But so just don't think that like for Jerusalem, for Israel, Jerusalem is they don't have the first holiest place, the second holiest place, the third holiest place. They got Jerusalem, the holy city, the city of Zion. In Muslims, right? In Islam, they have the most holy place, Mecca, I think, or I probably don't know. And of course, the Temple Mount is the third most holy place. So other religions have multiple holy places. Jews don't work that way. Jews got one place, and it's Jerusalem. So Persia, they're in Susa, and he goes there to Artaxerxes, and he had Kislev, the wintertime, November, December. What else was I going to say about this? Scott, my brain. The chapter ends with, and I was a cupbearer of the king. It's kind of funny just the way he ends that thing. So,
What do you think he said that?
I survived.
Yeah.
I'm right.
I'm going to say, hey, I made it through it. I'm going to poison me.
So in this chapter 2, verse 1 through, so this is an interesting thing. He actually, and it's funny because we said I survived. He hadn't even gone to the king yet. So he got the report, and chapter 1 was all about him getting the report and him praying about it and all that. We know because chapter 2 starts out in the month of Nisan. Well, when's the month of Nisan? It's the first month. So if Kislev is the 9th month, Nisan's the first month of their calendar, it's a 4-month period. There is a 4-month gap between Nehemiah becoming concerned and wanting to go to the king and him actually having an opportunity to go to the king. So it's not like he got the information and goes, I'm going to run to the king, because he doesn't have that authority, right? He has to make sure he's called to the king. But he was praying and fasting, which tells us something too. If something's really important to us, is it too long to pray, fast, and ask God for 4 months before you pull the trigger and try to do something? That's not our style, right? We're a drive-up window type society. And if I want something today, I'm probably going to try to make it happen today. And then I'll be disappointed because tomorrow's here and it hasn't happened yet, And that's not God's timing. It doesn't work like that. And so Nehemiah got this information, but it's not for 4 months that he finally, in the month of Nisan. Remember, Nisan is the first month. Tishri is the first civil month, which is the 7th religious month. Nisan's the first religious month of the Jewish calendar. He went to Artaxerxes, and this is the scenario where Nehemiah had been fasting and praying for 4 months. He goes in front of the king, and the king recognizes, why are you sad? And that's the danger, right? Because under the law, you could be killed for this. So why are you sad? And he, king says, this is not a sadness. You're not ill. So this is a sadness of the heart. And I like that what the king says. Nehemiah, and I didn't have enough space to put it in there, starts explaining the condition. How can I not be sad? The city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins. Now remember, he's never been there. He's talking from a report, but he's sad. And so the king basically stops and says, what do you want? And then Nehemiah says, then I prayed to God in heaven. Now you got to see this. He's in front of the king. He's sad. The king questions about that. He tells the king, and if you've ever reported to upper management and stuff, they're bottom line people. What do you ask? What's your ask? How long you need it? How much is it going to cost me? They don't care about the whys all the time, and they just want the bottom line. And that's what this king is. I just want the bottom line. What's your ask? And so Nehemiah, he got on his knees and Dear Heavenly Father, can you please give me wisdom on what? No, he didn't have time for that, right? He said a prayer in front of the king to himself, I'm sure. Lord, please give me wisdom and protect me in this time. And then he starts talking to the king. And I do that a lot. Don't you guys, when you're in a situation? I know this could get hostile, or I know this could have an outcome that I'm not sure of. And I say a very quick prayer, 10 seconds in my head as I'm talking, or as I'm, because we don't always have time to sit down on your knees, fold your hands, close your eyes. That's not what prayer is anyway. Prayer is communicating with our God. Now, there's a time to sit down. There's a time to kneel. There's a time to close your eyes. I don't recommend it while you're driving. If you pray while you're driving, keep your eyes open.
No, I agree. I've said many a prayer when I was driving.
You know it. Yes. And that, please give me mercy, or forgive me. Patience.
I usually do it when I've made a mistake, and I could have easily come up over a rise when I used to commute to downtown Dallas, and the traffic stopped, and they tell me God that all of a sudden.
So you need to slow down.
You know it. I've had those moments in my life as well, for sure. So just remember, prayer is not always there are lofty prayers. In fact, the longest prayer in the Bible will be later on in the book of Nehemiah. The longest prayer in the Bible is there. So there's a time for a lengthy prayer, but there's also a time for a quick prayer. And that's what he does here. He makes his request. Notice there's the queen. I tried to find a picture with the queen. I don't know if this is the best one. I found better pictures where Nehemiah, it looked cooler, but I didn't find one with the queen. Because the Bible actually says, and the queen was by his side. A lot of people said, well, that's about Queen Esther. Probably not, because Queen Esther was the queen before Artaxerxes, but Artaxerxes would have been her stepson, right? His dad Artaxerxes was the king during Esther's time, and we're in the 20th year of Artaxerxes. So yes, Artaxerxes was her stepson, but as soon as we're in the 20th year, let's say Artaxerxes died, and that would have made him king, his son, he would have taken, even if he wasn't married, he'd have taken a wife that year, because you would have taken a wife, you would have waited 20 years. So some of the commentaries I'm thinking, really, they said that could have been Queen Esther. It couldn't be. It's 20 years into his reign. That doesn't mean she might not still have been around, and she would have probably had influence, and she definitely had influence while he was a kid because she was the queen. But the queen, when Nehemiah was present, was probably Artaxerxes' wife. Anyway, just thought I'd point that out to you guys. So he goes, how long will it take? It's interesting. The Bible doesn't tell us. Like I said in the high level overview, it ends up being 12 years before he returns. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall on that thing and heard what he said, what Nehemiah said. Well, I gotta go rebuild the wall. It took him 52 days, but it might take me a year to rebuild it. I don't know how long he asked for time off, but he got 12 years. So that's kind of how that conversation would go. I gotta leave king for 12 years. Would the king have said yes? All of that is unknown to us because we're not given that detail, but he does have to return. It's not like he said, I need time off. I go do the job and I never come back. That didn't happen. He came back. He came back 12 years later. So anyway, that's where my mind goes is, did you get permission to go for 12 years?
Is my position still available when I come back?
Exactly. Surely you have a cupbearer the last 12 years, you have feel that you like now more than you liked me. I don't know. All of those things go to my head. But anyway, we also, in the end of chapter 2, we get 2 or 3 people, Sanballat, the Horonite, and then Tobiah, the Ammonite. They're going to get introduced. And then we also have an Arab. I guess I didn't put that because maybe in 2, we only get these 2. And then as we go on, we get 3 villains, for lack of a better thing to call them. So Nehemiah gets permission. He goes, he's there. I showed you this picture here because this is the temple grounds that surrounds the city, actually. This is the wall that surrounds the city. The temple's up here. And so I did want to make that. There's all these gates. There's the Valley Gate, the Dung Gate, the Fountain Gate, all these gates in here. And I have another picture in the next one because I want to talk about it. This shows you the complete one here. You got the Sheep Gate, the Master Gate, all of these gates around that. They're different than the gates in the temple area. The temple area also has the South Gate, the East Gate, the West Gate. So they have gates to get into the temple, the outer courts, and all that as well. Nehemiah is doing the wall around the city of Jerusalem, and there's all these gates. He comes there, and in this verse, in the remainder of chapter 2, he starts in the Valley Gate, and he says, I'm doing it at night because I don't want to tell anybody my plans yet, because I want to scope out what the work is before I bring everybody involved and tell them what I want to do. And he goes down there to the Valley Gate. He's on a mount, he says. It doesn't say whether it's a donkey or a mule or whatever. He goes down there, and then he gets to here, and there's so much rubble, his mount can't even get through. So he has to get off, and it talks about him walking afoot. I like this. On the horse or on the mule, and then walk all these footsteps, I guess, And then he returns. So he scopes this out at night, and he made a big deal of that, through all the rest of chapter 2. He makes a big deal of it. But he sits there and he goes and talks about all the gates. I kind of showed you what he did there. And then in 19 through 20 is where the villains come in. So finally he comes there and he's going to gather the people together, and he's going to tell them that he's here to rebuild the wall with them. Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arab. What this is telling us is all 3 of these. Sanballat is a Samaritan. Remember Samaritans, the 10 tribes of the north, taken off by Assyria. Assyria brought people in there, and they created the Samaritans. Yes, I am running late. Anyway, Kim, did you figure watch for me? Anyway, so these enemies here, it tells us that they're all over. They're the Samaritans, Sanballat. They're the Ammonites. Remember, the Ammonites is Lot's youngest daughter's descendants. And then you even got Geshem, the Arabs. So all the nationalities surrounding the area are against this. And they're going to, through this whole effort, we saw in Ezra, the book of Ezra, Zerubbabel had conflicts. Ezra himself had oppositions and conflicts. Nehemiah is going to has so much more. I mean, almost to battle, right? It
would really stink if you had to go through the dung gate, don't they?
Yeah, and the dung gate is what the dung gate sounds like. That's where the waste went, It was way away from the temple, and the dung gate was exited, and the waste was way away from the city too. It wasn't like dumped right outside the city. It went to a valley, and the valley, Gehenna. Have you heard of Gehenna? I'm off track here.
I didn't mean to take you out.
No, that's fine. Gehenna is hell, is the Hebrew word for hell, Gehenna, and it comes from the dung gate where they dumped all their, and is smoldering. It was always burning because it was like a compost down there of waste. Anyway, it's a whole other story as well, but it's cool. It's cool.
Are we leaving now?
You don't want to live by the dung gate. So he had gobs of mockery and everything that they were doing. And then he prays though. I'm sorry. They're mocking him, and he tells them he could have said like, look, I was the cupbearer to the king. Me and him were like this. He gave me these letters. He gave me letters to use his wood. He gave me letters to use the tax source. I have permission. He didn't go to the king for it. He said, God, the God of heaven will give us success. So that's important. So it doesn't matter what the world says that I have authority to do. My authority comes from God. And that's what Nehemiah knew. He had authority from the highest worldly person on earth at the time. Artaxerxes was king of all the land. No one was more powerful than this man. And he gave him decrees, letters of permission. He didn't use them.
He also gave him an escort.
He did. He had gone with him. You're right.
Yeah.
He had an escort that went down with him. Good point.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he had backing. He had world authority, but he didn't go to his world authority. He went to God. Our God will make us successful. And that's kind of a great lesson in life, right? We can do the same thing. No matter what we think, who we think we are, if God's not behind me, then I'm an army of one. Chapter 3, they start building on the wall, and I'm going to, this has a lot of names, and in fact, a lot of these chapters are going to have a lot of names, and I'm not reading any of them. I'm going to send all the names to Doug. Doug's going
We'll
to
fix it all.
Doug's going to put my voice over top of those, and then we're going to play it for you. So what they do here is Nehemiah organizes this, and he says, like, it starts out in the first verse. Does it? I didn't put the first verse. I put 5. Anyway, the high priest, and all the priests work on the sheep gate. Remember the gates? He works on the sheep gate. Why? Because that's the most important gate to the priest. They bring in the sacrifices of the animals through the sheep gate into the temple to do the sacrifices. So they're working on that portion of the wall. And then he starts assigning families to all the work. And he assigns the families to the work as close to their homes as they can get them. So, people live inside the walls that are ruined. And so if you live in this one neighborhood, you're working on that section of the wall. It's kind of adopt a highway program, if it's near your neighborhood, you adopt a highway to clean it up. Well, they're adopting a section of the wall that's near their homes. And those family groups are repairing those sections of the wall. And they divide all of those up by the number of gates, from this gate to this gate, and they go on and on. It's repeated. In fact, as I say, as it's naming these family members, it uses, and next to him is this blah, 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 and it names the head of the family, and then a bunch of names of the family that's in his family. And that's said 16 times in this chapter. And next to him, and then a bunch of names again. And next to him, a bunch of names again. So you can read those. You probably won't memorize the names either. It did in 5 here. I put it up there because it broke the pattern. Most of the patterns are each family group that are working on which section of the wall. And you get to 5, and it talks about their noblemen. The toka, the nobleman, did not work. It doesn't say anything about Nehemiah addressing it. He moves right. He makes that statement that the nobleman refused to work. Their people were doing their section of the wall, but the wealthy as a nobleman did not do it. But that family only, not the other families. Later, we're going to see where this comes into play, because we're going to have to address a problem where the wealthy were giving loans, taking land and putting in slavery and putting interest rates, usury on their money, which is against the Levitical law. And that's going to be addressed later on in the chapters. And I better pick up my pace. Opposition intensifies. It talks about the ridicule that's coming from these guys. They make statements like, oh, the wall's so shabby, even if a fox was to jump on it, it's going to fall down. So they're making it's kind of like, I guess my point is, when we reach opposition, especially in America now, there's countries across the world that if you claim to be a Christian, you could get killed, right? I mean, in the Middle East and stuff. But in America, we don't get that. How does it start? How does opposition to your faith start? Ridicule. They make fun of you. Oh, you're a Bible thumper. They have all different, but they try to make fun of us to suppress us.
Belittle us.
To belittle us, yeah.
Yeah, definitely won't fight back.
So we won't fight back. And that's what Sanballat and Tobiah are doing here too. They're ridiculing them and Geshem from Arab. They're making all these things. It's going to, and in the world it gets this way too. With these guys, they're going to start out with ridicule, but it's going to get violent. It's going to work its way through this to more serious, to violent, where Nehemiah and them have to handle it with a brick laying in one hand and a sword in their other hand, type of thing. So it's going to get bad here. In verse 10, I did want to touch this as well, but you can read. You guys are probably reading ahead here. They posted guards. They were developing strategy after strategy to be able to continue working on the wall and also address the persecution that was coming their way. But in verse 10, it does get to a point where the laborers were giving out, and they started calling. They said, "And there's so much rubble." When they first did this in the first this chapter 2 and 3 and stuff, they saw this as God's will, and they tacked it and they started doing it. But as the persecutions come in their way, what are the persecutors calling this? They're calling it rubble. And all of a sudden, I was going to camp here a little longer, but words mean a lot. And whoever wins the war of naming something, Planned Parenthood, there's no planning for parenthood in Planned Parenthood. There are names of things that if you win, you've won half the war, So they were calling it rubble, and all of a sudden Nehemiah and his workers started using the same terminology they were throwing at them and saying, look at all this rubble. Well, this is opportunities. These are stones to be built with, So you got to watch it when we're going through life. I like biblical words, and I don't want to get too far off this too. I mean, even I'm going to say a pet peeve of mine again, and I have a lot of these, so I apologize. 7-year tribulation. It's not in the Bible. It's the 70th week of Daniel. It's, the Great Tribulation. Anyway, the words matter. Use what God says about the word. That's what you should say about the word. We, in our laziness, sometimes apply general words over things, but they're not as meaningful as what God did. God does words for a reason. And don't let the world, even lazy Christians, put things on you that aren't in the Bible. So that's my soapbox for that. So that gets us to chapter 5. He is addressing the internal crisis. So this is what I was telling you about, where the people were crying out because there was lack of food. There was, this is where, if you read all of chapter 5, what's going on, I'm just going to surmise it here. They were running out of food. They were having a hard time. And the people who had money started giving them loans to buy food, because they still have crops and stuff that they're having to work and all that. And they were also taking their land. And Nehemiah comes and sees this and says, what is going on? This is the way the world, the Gentiles, treat us. Why are we treating our own people the same way? And the Bible explicitly says that they are not allowed to loan money and charge interest on it. And remember, the Levitical law, they have to forgive that money every Sabbath, right? Every 7 years. They forgive all of that land. Every Jubilee, all the land goes back to the original family. God set up a system where there's never going to be institutional debt or generational debt or generational wealth. It always resets back to the families, to the families of the time. and they were going outside the word of God, and they were charging their own, people interest rates. And Nehemiah said, "Stop this." And the Bible pretty quick about it. When Nehemiah addressed it, boom, the next verse are saying the noblemen agreed, and they did it. They gave all the money back to the people that they had, that cleared all the debt. So it is a big deal, and it was becoming a big deal. But it's interesting that in the Bible, in chapter 5, when Nehemiah brings it to the nobleman's attention, boom, they say, "Okay, we understand," and then it just stops. So
They didn't fight it.
they didn't fight it. Yeah, yeah. And normally when money's involved, it gets ugly. Even for Christians, money. I always say never loan money to family members. Just give it to them, because it just causes problems. Chapter 6. So remember, I was telling you how this progression of opposition, it goes from ridicule to a little more severe ridicule, and then it goes to violence. So this whole chapter here talks about, and I'm just going to once again high level overview. These three gentlemen send a request to Nehemiah. "Hey, come meet us over here in this valley, and we want to talk to you and work things out." And they do it, what, 5 times? 5 times. Nehemiah ignores them. And finally he says, "Hey, I'm too busy. I'm working on this huge project. I don't have time." But he gives us a little insight. He's saying, "I'm not doing it because I know this is a trap." God kind of gave him wisdom to see that this was a trap. They wanted to draw him out so that they could kill him, because he was like the leader. If they killed him, they figured they'd stop this whole effort. And they probably would have, because some of the other examples that we had. So that's what was going on in this whole chapter. And then it ends, like I said, in chapter 6, verse 15, it just says, the wall was finished in 52 days. So some of these times it's just detailed description, and then it ends with Moses dies, or it ends with the wall was finished in 52 days. I mean, it just boom, period. The end. I don't know if you guys ever saw, what's that cartoon about the cavemen? I know it's not biblical, but he tells stories with draws on the caves on the wall. And he goes, "And then they die." And every one of his stories, "And then they die." What was that cartoon? Was it a Disney cartoon? Oh. Anyway, it doesn't matter, right? So why did I bring it up, Scott? Anyway, because it was funny to me. In 7, after the wall had been rebuilt, they had set the doors in places and the gatekeepers. What was I going to say? So this is another chapter. If you go to it, I put lots of names. There's been lots of names already in the book of Nehemiah, but 7 is Nehemiah is giving credit for everybody who came back to rebuild and work on the wall, and he's given it by family name. It's just. Did I tell you how many verses in there is in? It ends with verse 66. In verse 66, and it says all the company of number was 42,360. So we go 66 verses. The first 3 verses aren't. I showed you the first 3 verses, and then it turns into verses 4 through 66. That's just name after name.
Critics
after name.
just roll it.
Is it just 3,000 people work on the wall, or family groups?
I
I think
think
in 52
people.
days for that big of a wall is fast.
It is fast. It is
So
fast.
how many people do we think?
I
actually
think
were
there's
working on it?
42,360 people
Individuals.
in individuals made up of families, because when you go to this list, it says the head of the family and the blah, 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 blah,
Okay.
head of the family. But these were workers, 42,000 workers. These weren't, the children. These were people who were working on the wall. It's still amazing thing that they finished that, in 52 days.
I mean, the rubble was right there. So it's
Yeah,
just a
true,
matter of
true,
bringing
yeah.
it over
Yep,
and
and put it
fix
out.
it up.
Yeah. And the opposition was, if a fox jumped on this, it would knock your wall down. So it wasn't probably,
Sturdy.
yes, proceed. It was a wall. It was a wall that they kept. So the interesting thing, though, is remember this is like considered the second migration out of captivity. The first migration, we had 2 million people that came to the promised land. This is not that many people. Even in the city of Jerusalem here, 42,000 people is pretty sparse. So
Is it 42 or 400?
no, it's 42,000. 42,000 people. It is not a lot of people. It is not a lot of people. So, It wasn't completed. It wasn't, the migration wasn't completed. The building of the wall was. So so what happens here is we're going to get introduced here to Ezra again. And remember, Ezra, we hadn't heard from him. He was there 13 years before Nehemiah. Nehemiah comes, and Ezra was older. He was a priest, right? He was older. Now he's joining efforts with Nehemiah. They pull out the wall because even though they had the temple built, they had not recommitted to the covenant, the Mosaic covenant that they were under. And so between Ezra and Nehemiah, they bring the law out, they read the law. And for those of us who get upset and Glenn when he runs 15 minutes over or 5 minutes over, whatever, they read the law for 6 hours. So from morning till noon.
This is really unusual. As they say, it was made up of men and women.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was
Not normal, yeah.
not normal at all.
Yeah, that's true. And so eight's all about the reading of the word, and every great revival, if you study in history, starts with someone getting on their knees, praying, which we've already seen them do, and opening the word of God. You cannot have a revival without the life source that starts a revival, the word of God. And that's what they do. They open the word of God, they read it, and I don't know if I had it there or is it in the next chapter.
What if it was participation? I got a question, and that's why it took so long.
Yeah, well, they did. It talks about them reading the word, them worshiping. It was a 12-hour thing because 6 hours of reading of the law and then 6 hours of worshiping. So it was a long.
Yeah.
If you've ever been to a tent revivals kind of work that way too. They just keep going and going and going.
Yeah.
So, and after what happens after you pray and after you open the word of God, people start confessing. So they did. All the people, hearts were moved and they start confessing. Interesting. This is where the longest, I think, prayer is in the Bible. And the reason it's long is this historical prayer that he talked about. He is praying. I say pray the Bible, pray using the word. He's touched with Abraham. He goes through the whole, in his prayer, through the history of the nation of Israel. So that's why it's so long. It's like it's from verse 5 to verse 37 is his prayer. So, if you were teaching this, you probably break that up into 2 sessions and teach the prayer alone, verses 5 through.
He was doing what you were doing. You're done.
Yeah, he was high level. He was very high level. They all made the binding agreement. So in 38 ends it, once again, they all made a binding agreement in writing. So that's how it ends. They agree after this revival that's going on, they've recommitted themselves to the Mosaic law, that conditional law. 10, I gotta really hurry up here. More names.
Look at that.
It's only 9:35. So what are you talking about? We have plenty of time.
Yeah, I'll put it. What happens there is this is where Nehemiah comes back. I think they are starting to intermarry again. And he comes back. Yeah, so he's gone now. So he went back to our first 12 years. He's come back. Now he's saying, I leave. I don't know how long he left for, a year, 2 years, 5 years. We don't know because it doesn't tell us. But he comes back and they're intermarrying. They're not observing the Sabbath. They're doing threshing floors on the Sabbath and all this stuff. And you got to read this because he gets mad. He pulls people's hair out. I mean, he rips their clothes. I mean, he's upset and he addresses these people that have broken the covenant. They just, of course, we don't know how many years, but the chapter right before it, they just agreed again to the covenant. They just put themselves under the binding covenant again. And now they've already strayed away.
So there's no ruler in Jerusalem while he's gone. There's nobody to keep them.
There's a high priest. I mean, there's the high
not doing his
priest, but
job.
he's not doing it well, or they don't come to church, right? There might be a pastor preaching, but if people don't come to church, he's not responsible to go chase them out of their house into their church. And so there's a high priest running the temple at this time, but the people have done what the people want to do. So now we get to 11, and so 10 has a lot more to it, guys. So I encourage you to read it, and you'll read that. 11, all of a sudden, we've kind of got things straight. Nehemiah's got things straight down on his return, and they start to repopulate the city of Jerusalem. And there's an interesting thing. It says they cast lots because people were already in the lands and in their houses and in their fields that they have. And they're saying, hey, we have to populate the city. The city's not populated. So they cast lots, and 1 out of every 10 agree to make a sacrifice and live in the city, because the rest of them will go back to their own land, their own property and stuff. So that I thought that was interesting, that they kind of looked at it as a sacrifice to have to come and live in the city instead of the rural area where they were working their land and stuff. And the rest of the 9 went back to their land, the Bible says, and worked their land. And so it goes through the populations of who's going to populate what. The rest of Israel priests are in the town, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Blah, blah, blah.
They're willing to sacrifice. Next.
Yes, next. 12, we're getting through here. The good thing about getting us through this quicker is because lots of the chapters have a lot of names, so we can just say a lot of names and then not have to.
They really wear hats like that, though.
I know. So this is a bad picture. Probably what this chapter is all about is
That rickety wall, they're gonna fall.
they go up to the wall, they split up the people into 2 big choirs, and Nehemiah takes one of the large choirs up to the wall and goes one direction, and Ezra takes the rest of the second choir and goes up and goes to the other direction, and they start singing and praising to God in 2 choirs going around the wall, and they walk around it and they meet at the other end, and they're singing out, and they say everybody throughout the land could hear their voices. I don't know if anybody ever went to a Promise Keeper. I went in the 90s to the one at Texas Stadium. There were 60, 70,000 men. We sang Amazing Grace. 60,000 men singing Amazing Grace. We had cars and trucks stopping on the road, stopping to listen to that. It's the best Amazing Grace song I've ever heard, with 60,000 men singing it to us. Yeah. And so that's kind of what's going on here, right? They got these 2 great choirs, and they're all singing, and it's just echoing all throughout Jerusalem. And so that's pretty much 12. And then we end with 13. Nehemiah's final reforms. So he establishes the high priest. They consecrated the temple again. They reissued the covenant. There's problems. The high priest, what's his name? You see his name here? Anyway, he had Tobias. Remember Tobias? He's one of those oppressors that was making fun of him and everything. He had let him live in one of the rooms in the temple, and Nehemiah got ticked about that. He threw him out. So he throws Tobiah out, and again he cleans up a lot of the stuff that was going on, because remember there was mixed marriages still, so he had to commit to that. And they did. Remember what was it? That was where Ezra, I guess, where they had to divorce and release all. They had to do this again. They let all the foreigners go. Anything they had business, not only marriage, any marriages they had with mixed ones, and any business deals they had with foreigners, they had to stop. And their own ICE agents. So the reform goes on, and it kind of ends here. It ends open-ended, right? Now we will see a little more when we get to the book of Nehemiah, because Malachi is the last book in the Protestant Bible. He's the last of the prophetic books, and he's also ministering in that part 2 of Nehemiah. When Nehemiah returns after the 12-year period, he partners with Malachi. We'll learn all about Nehemiah. Kind of stops abruptly, but when we study Malachi, we'll get more information on what he's doing, because he's ministering through this time.
It helps you know why all those people over there are so angry with the Jews all the time, because they bring them in when they need them, and they kick them out when they're dying.
Yeah, no, you're right.
I mean, they're kind of valid there.
They are. No, the Jews are not without problems, right? I mean, we've seen that. I don't care what period of time, kings, judges, whatever,
Yeah.
So, That was a little fast, but yeah,